You are about to hear about a single audio file that has been whispered about in basements, server rooms, and off-the-record meetings for nearly 3 decades. It arrived with no return address, stamped confidential, and attached to it was an impossible claim, a recording of a living creature producing structured speech like sounds, not random calls, not mimicry, but sounds organized in ways that suggest meaning. If authentic, this tape forces science, policy, and centuries of folklore to collide. Tonight, we'll answer the question that has haunted every campsite rumor and midnight forum thread. Does Bigfoot speak? More importantly, we will reveal what this confidential tape actually contains, who examined it, and what the recording suggests about intent, intelligence, and danger. This is the promise of the hour. You will hear the chain of custody, learn who analyzed the file and why their credentials matter, and be given a clear, sober reading of the most chilling segments. We will break down the acoustic oddities that resist easy explanation and explain, in plain terms, what those anomalies imply for anyone living, working, or recreating near protected wilderness. This is not another grainy night call or a misinterpreted howl. The file passed through the hands of a federal whistleblower who feared for the safety of field crews, a retired acoustic biologist known for meticulous laboratory work and for debunking hoaxes, and a native elder who listened and heard something remembered for generations. Their reactions were not uniform surprise. They were an uneasy alignment, technical validation on one side, cultural recognition on the other. That convergence is rare. It is also why this tape cannot be waved away as mere curiosity. Before we go deeper, understand the stakes. The recording is not merely interesting, it reads, through sound, like a map, a warning, and a challenge. There are segments that transcribe into short, ordered phrases that seem to assert presence, define boundaries, and prohibit certain actions. There are acoustic features that point to a vocal mechanism unlike a human throat. And there are contextual clues, timestamps, seismic correlations, and eyewitness notes that situate the event in a real, restricted landscape where gear went missing and crews altered their routes afterward. By the end of this narrative, you will know exactly who handled the tape, what meticulous tests were run, which parts of the recording stood up to scrutiny, and what those parts mean in human terms. We will also lay out immediate, practical warnings drawn from the evidence, because this is not harmless entertainment. Playbacks can attract, misinterpretation can escalate. Failing to respect the boundary the tape asserts can produce real consequences. So, stay with me. Listen carefully to the phrases we'll transcribe, to the explanations of the anomalies, and to the steps you must take if you ever encounter similar sounds. The tape speaks in a low, deliberate register in its final line. When we get to it, will demand that we do more than listen. It will demand action. Extraordinary claims demand extraordinary care. So when a single, confidential audio file turned up in 1998, hand-delivered, unstamped, attached to an internal memo that mentioned a small program nicknamed Project Nightcall, it was treated the way any serious researcher treats an unexpected find, with suspicion, procedure, and chain of custody. The file came from a former field technician at a federal land agency who insisted on anonymity. He said the clip was pulled from a locked archive after an incident had been quietly logged and then shelved. A journalist received a copy and, knowing its potential significance, did not publish it. Instead, the file was forwarded under strict confidentiality to Dr. Karen Ellis, an acoustic biologist with a reputation for methodical work and for exposing hoaxes. If anyone could tell whether the sounds were real, altered, or cleverly faked, it would be her. Dr. Ellis did not work alone. Martin Blake, retired from a federal investigative unit that handled unusual incidents, took responsibility for documenting the file's transfer and confirming the metadata. Blake ran standard forensic checks, file headers, checksums, modification timestamps, and embedded GPS markers. What he found was notable. The raw file header contained a timestamp and a geotag consistent with a protected quadrangle in the Pacific Northwestern area that, according to internal logs, had restricted access that very week. Blake also tracked down an internal memo recently declassified, in part that referenced unidentified acoustic events, monitored by a small team operating under the informal name Project Night. Those paper trails tied the digital fragment to a place and a program, reducing the chance that what we were holding was a random clip cut from some public source. Beyond the lab paperwork, The tape was offered to cultural knowledge holders. Mary Talpine, an elder from a local indigenous community and keeper of oral histories, listened with no fanfare and without the disbelief you might expect from a modern scientist hearing a supposed monster. Her reaction was quiet and certain. The cadence, the tones, the pauses, those were not just noises. They matched patterns of boundary speech and admonitions woven into stories she had heard since childhood. For Mary, the sounds carried intent and familiar phrasing. For Dr. Ellis and Blake, they demanded technical proof. Skepticism mattered in every step. Human mimicry, practiced imitations, and digital editing have produced convincing hoaxes before. Dr. Ellis ran the usual battery of tests. She inspected the spectral content for edit points, checked for aliasing and resampling artifacts, and separated layers to see if the voice sat unnaturally on top of environmental noise. She compared the formant structured, the resonant bands that give vowels, their shape to catalogs of human known animal vocalizations. Martin Blake cross-checked metadata against agency logs and interviewed personnel who had been on duty that season. The team also attempted controlled recreations. Skilled imitators, sound editors, and field recordists tried to reproduce the exact patterns. None matched all of the anomalies simultaneously. What emerged from that process was not a single smoking gun, but a series of converging lines of evidence. The file had credible provenance tied to an official program. The audio showed structural features that did not align cleanly with human voices or with common editing fingerprints. And a cultural reader recognized the sequence as meaningful in ways that paralleled the technical findings. In short, this was not a clip that could be dismissed out of hand. That does not mean the tape is irrefutable proof of anything by itself. It means the tape survived the first and hardest tests of credibility. It earned the right to be taken seriously. From here onward, every claim about content, intent, or danger needs to be built on the controlled analyses and cultural context that gave this recording its gravity. The question is no longer whether the tape exists, it is what the tape is trying to say and why. Before we play that tape, you need to understand exactly why this one is different. Most so-called Bigfoot recordings collapse under a single explanation: a startled human, a known animal, or a clever edit. This file survived each of those verdicts not because of wishful thinking, but because of layers, acoustic, temporal, and contextual, that stacked together in ways hard to fake. Dr. Ellis began by treating the file the way any skeptical scientist would, as raw data. She isolated the vocal events from ambient noise and then looked at them with tools that reveal what our ears cannot: spectrograms, formant trackers, and harmonic analyzers. What jumped out were formant-like bands that moved over time in consistent patterns. In human speech, vowel quality is defined by the spacing of these bands. Here, the bands shifted in coordinated trajectories that suggested controlled modulation, like a vocal tract shaping different resonances intentionally. They were not the smeared blobs you expect from wind or random animal calls. They had edges, starts and stops, and transitions that line up with what you'd call consonant-like bursts, followed by vowel-like sustain. Equally strange were the subharmonic features energy at fractional multiples of the fundamental frequency that point to a vibrating source with a larger, effective cavity than the humans. In plain terms, the instrument making these sounds looked acoustically bigger than a human throat. That alone wouldn't prove anything. What made the signal unusual was how those spectral features sat inside the environmental soundscape. The voice-like events were embedded in a field, recording with footsteps, branch snaps, and distant water. They were not overdubbed on top of that soundstage, they were woven into it. That observation is where the second, quieter channel became crucial. An unattended seismic logger in the same protected quadrangle have recorded a series of low-frequency impulses, regular impacts, consistent with large bipedal steps. When Ellis aligned the seismic timecodes with the audio timeline, a pattern emerged. Certain vocal events occurred precisely between pairs of footfall impulses. In many cases, a vocalization would start as a step landed and then finish before the next impact. That temporal coupling strongly suggested co-location. The sounds and the footsteps were produced by the same moving source in the same space and time. Martin Blake handled the metadata and the contextual side. He was able to confirm timestamps, GPS markers, and a chain of custody log that placed the recording in a protected plot known for limited access. He also dug up an internal memo recently declassified, that referenced an incident on the same date. Unidentified vocalization followed by directional movement toward border. That phrase matched the pattern observed in the audioseismic correlation. A vocal warning, then purposeful movement along a boundary. But technical matches only get you so far. That's where Mary Talpine's response provided a bridge between numbers and narrative. When the file was played for her in a quiet room, she did not smile or laugh. She sat rigid and then said, quietly, "That is boundary talk." For Mary, the sequence of syllables, the places where the voice paused, and the tone of the longer utterances recalled oral histories about spoken warnings tied to place names, phrases used to name, warn, or claim territories. Her input shifted the analysis from unusual sounds to possibly lexical items with meaning in a local cultural frame. To test whether those syllables could map onto human language, Ellis and a linguist ran phonetic transcriptions. They compared the transcriptions to local indigenous place names and to the informal labels used by land managers. In a number of cases, fragments from the recording matched syllables from names used on maps and in oral tradition. The match was not perfect, and it was not whole sentence translation, but the repetition of particular consonant vowel shapes aligned with place name syllables often enough to make coincidence less likely. That suggested the vocalizations might be serving referential functions, naming or pointing to locations, rather than being mere expressive noises. Finally, the team tried to recreate the signal under controlled conditions. Skilled human imitators, animal callers, and digital editors all worked to reproduce the full suite of anomalies. The spectrographic formants, the subharmonic energy, the precise temporal coupling with seismic impulses, and the phonetic fragments that resembled local names. None could replicate everything at once. Some could fake parts of it. None could produce the whole pattern while matching the metadata and field context. Taken together, these lines of evidence changed the question. It was no longer merely, could this file be faked? The better question became, if it is genuine, what is it trying to do? The clues pointed toward three possibilities happening at once: presence announcement, territorial warning, and directed reference to human activity or places. That is the context in which we must hear the tape. What you're about to listen to was not a lone cry in the wood. It appears to be an address. It names space, asserts limits, and according to the experts who handled it, expects a human response. 9 minutes into the file, there is a pocket of sound so clear it makes everything that came before feel like a preface. Dr. Ellis isolated a 42-second segment and played it at normal speed. Then again slowed, then again through filters that stripped wind and ground noise. What emerges in that window is not a single howl or a series of animal calls. It is patterned, punctuated, and most disturbingly repetitive in ways that map onto human speech rhythms. Here is the closest intelligible rendering the team reached after repeated phonetic transcriptions and cross-checks with linguists and local language holders. Listen to these phrases as approximations, not perfect translations. They are the human-readable shape of a non-human signal. We are here, not alone. Leave them, no take. Those lines are not spoken like a sentence in continuous speech. They come as discrete utterances, separated by short pauses that line up with movement on the seismic track. A quiet footstep, a shift of weight, the brush of foliage. In the recording, the pauses function like commas and map to physical action. The pattern is clear. The vocal events say something, then the source moves, then it speaks again. That coupling of sound and motion makes the segment read less like random noise and more like deliberate, embodied communication. Acoustic analysis supplies even more trouble for easy explanations. Dr. Ellis ran formant tracking on the vowel-like resonances. Humans produce recognizable formant bands because of our throat and mouth shape. Those bands move in predictable ways when we change vowels. In this case, the first and second formants exist, but their spacing is unusual. The gap between them is consistently wider than a human, female, or male at comparable pitch. The harmonic structure contains strong subharmonic energy frequencies that appear at fractional multiples of the fundamental. Subharmonics often result from a vibrating source with a large, non-human resonating chamber, or with non-standard vocal fold mechanics. Put plainly, the signal has speech-like organization, but the instrument producing it is not a human language. Equally important is the temporal transients, consonant-like transients short, noisy bursts, resembling plosives or fricatives precede vowel-like glides in a patterned way. Linguists on the team labeled these transients as consonant candidates, then compared their distribution to local place name syllables and the informal labels used by land managers. The overlap was striking enough to be meaningful. Specific consonant vowel shapes from the tape recurred in place name syllables and in the shorthand used on resource maps. That suggested referential use naming or pointing rather than pure effective noise. Under a quieter layer of the same 42 seconds lies something even more precise. When the engineers boosted the low-level channel and slowed it by a factor of 4, a tonal sequence resolved into repeated pitch contours. Those contours aren't random melodies, they repeat, with small variations, in a way linguists would read as a list of items names or coordinates rendered as tone patterns. Martin Blake took those contours and compared them against a set of declassified internal land management logs supplied by whistleblowers. The match was not poetic coincidence. Several of the pitch sequences corresponded to code names used for restricted extraction, plots areas tied to logging, mineral surveys, and equipment staging. That linkage changes the meaning of the words on the tape. The fragment no take stops being an ambiguous lament and becomes a direct injunction aimed at specific human activity. Leave them reads like an order to leave people or resources alone. We are here and not alone. Open the space as claimed and populated. The combined effect is threefold: presence, announcement, territorial warning, and directed reference to human work on the landscape. Skeptics will say parts of this could be imitated. Some imitators in the controlled tests managed to produce consonant-like bursts or mimic certain harmonics. But no human mimic, no animal caller, and no digital patchwork could reproduce the whole package: the precise formant, trajectories, the subharmonic structure, the strict alignment with seismic footfall, and the low-level tonal list that matched internal code names while also sitting inside an untouched file whose metadata and chain of custody matched field logs. That is the crux. The tape resists a single, simple explanation because it is not just sound. It is sound embedded in action, in place, and in human administrative language. What you are hearing, as rendered above, is therefore not merely a curiosity. It is a communicative act aimed at human practices on a mapped landscape. The voice, if it can be called, that names space, warns, and tells us in no uncertain terms what behavior it expects. For those who handle the file, that combination of phonetic, cultural, and operational evidence was enough to stop treating the material as a harmless oddity and to start treating it as intelligence. The question that follows is no longer just what made the sound, but what we do now that something has spoken with our words and our maps in its mouth. If the tape's words are not random noise, but deliberate warnings, the question becomes not, what is this? But what must we do now? The evidence forces a shift from curiosity to caution. The recording does three things at once. It names presence, it signals boundaries, and it connects those signals to human activities in specific places. That combination creates an operational problem and an immediate duty of care. Ignore it at your peril. First, and most important, do not play this audio in the field. The file behaves like both an address and a trigger. In controlled conditions, documented in the chain of custody files, careful playback of isolated segments produced predictable responses. Under lab supervision, teams played a 10-second excerpt through speakers in a sealed enclosure while maintaining full safety protocols. Infrared cameras and motion sensors recorded a large silhouette approaching the source, lingering, and then performing deliberate, non-random movements around the perimeter. In an outdoor simulation where teams mistakenly broadcast a longer excerpt from a truck near an equipment cache, the next morning personnel found tents rearranged, tent stakes removed, and small gear missing, a clear escalation from warning to active interference. Those outcomes are not accidents. The tape's vocal structure, the pauses timed with seismic footfalls, the directed consonant-like bursts, the tonal sequences mapping to resource plots, suggests an evolved strategy, vocalized to signal and, if the signal is ignored, take steps that discourage further human activity. Field reports tied to the tapes, they'd support this. Crews who heeded the warnings left the area unmolested. Crews who ignored repeated vocalizations later found tools gone, lines cut, and in one reported case, a temporary communications array disabled by an apparently purposeful cover of brush. The pattern is consistent with territorial enforcement, not random play. Because of that, The immediate action is defensive and preservational, not provocative. If you find a recording like this or hear similar vocalizations, preserve the original exactly as you found it. Do not amplify, edit, or post it online. Every alteration can destroy forensic clues and can turn a warning into a lure. Move away slowly along your ingress route. Do not run, do not shout, and do not attempt to mimic or answer the sounds. The safest response recorded by witnesses is a calm, deliberate withdrawal. Photograph the scene from a distance and log GPS coordinates, time, and weather. If possible, document any physical changes to gear or site before touching equipment. Contact park authorities or an established research group and insist on a secure chain of custody for media and GPS data. For professionals and agencies, the tape prescribes a specific protocol. Agencies that quietly reviewed the file already adjusted patrol patterns, staged equipment retrieval teams, and changed how caches are stored. Those are the right moves. More precisely, treat any relevant media as forensic evidence. Make a bit-for-bit copy immediately and store the original offline. Label it with collector name, time, and exact GPS. Do not conduct blind field playback. Any audio played in situ should be limited to safety, communications among personnel, never to broadcasting suspected warning segments. Gather correlated data, deploy seismic loggers, motion cameras, and environmental microphones before attempting further study. Correlated timestamps are what separate later edits from live events. For acoustics, submit untouched files to credentialed acoustic biologists for spectrographic and format analysis. Preserve original sample rate and bit depth. Downmixing ruins format cues. Use multidisciplinary review panels. Acoustic results gain power when combined with metadata, indigenous knowledge, and operational records. Engage local knowledge holders early and with respect. There's also an ethical dimension. Mary Talpine and other cultural knowledge holders made clear that these sounds occupy a known communicative space in oral tradition. Boundary speech, naming, and work must proceed with their consent and guidance. Any public release that strips context or sensationalizes the material risks cultural harm and could increase dangerous interactions. Researchers should formalize agreements with communities before publishing interpretations that touch on traditional knowledge. Finally, the tape reframes how agencies should approach their operations in sensitive territories. If a non-human intelligence is mapping our concessions and staging zones with the same names we use, then standard protocols for resource work need revision. Secure caches, minimize overnight field presence, avoid predictable routes, and increase non-invasive monitoring. Where possible, shift early exploratory work to small teams that can withdraw quickly and avoid leaving attractants. The bigger lesson is this: the sound is not an oddity to be live-streamed for likes. It is a communicative act that carries consequences. When a voice, whether called Bigfoot or something else, issues a boundary in our tongue and points to our maps, it forces a choice. We can respond with curiosity that courts danger, or we can respond with respect and science. The tape demands the latter. Preserve evidence, avoid provocation, coordinate with experts and local stewards, and adjust field operations to reduce conflict. If you handle such a file, act as if human safety and irreplaceable data depend on your restraint, because they do. The voice on the tape read like a warning, a map, and a challenge. Our responsibility is to treat it as such, document, withdraw, and bring the evidence to those equipped to analyze it without making the situation worse. If you think you've heard something like the tape, or you stumble across odd audio online, your first obligation is simple: protect people and preserve the evidence. The voice on that confidential file behaved like a signal and a sedative at once. It can warn, it can move, and it can provoke. Treat any similar encounter as potentially dangerous and as potentially invaluable data. Below is a clear, practical checklist you can follow right now. Do these things before you do anything else. For anyone who hears structured vocalizations in the field, stop moving, freeze where you are, and listen. Sudden motion can be read as threat or curiosity. Back out the way you came. Retrace your entry path slowly and without sudden gestures. Keep your hands visible and your group together. Do not imitate or call back. Do not play recorded sounds, even briefly. The recording acts as both a address and trigger. Playback can attract or escalate. Note environmental details without disturbing the scene: time, weather, vegetation, wind direction, visible trails, and any fresh disturbances to camp or gear. If safe to do so, photograph the area from a distance and record GPS coordinates on your phone, but do this after you've withdrawn to a secure position. Make no immediate social media posts. Publicizing raw media can lead to dangerous curiosity and to reckless playback by others. If you find or handle audio files, preserve the original, untouched file. Do not open, convert, edit, trim, or amplify the master. Every change risks destroying evidential metadata. Create a forensic bit-for-bit copy immediately. Store the original on a read-only medium if possible. Label media clearly with date, time, collector, and location. Generate and record checksums MD5 or SHA-2564 originals and copies to prove later integrity. Preserve original sample rate and bit depth. Note the recording device model and settings if available. When transferring files, prefer a wired connection, USB, or card reader. Disable automatic cloud sync on devices before export to prevent unintentional uploads. Use free tools for initial viewing, Audacity, VLC, but reserve detailed analysis for qualified labs. For spectrographic work, use PROT, Raven, or a university acoustic lab to avoid misleading artifacts from amateur filtering. Do not publicly post raw files or invite anonymous downloads. Controlled release should be coordinated with investigators and cultural partners. For field teams and researchers, treat the site like a crime scene. Photograph, record, and catalog everything before touching or moving gear. Collect correlated data, motion camera files, seismic logs, ranger patrol logs, weather station records, and any GPS track data from field teams. Cross-referencing these streams is often what proves authenticity. Use chain of custody forms for all media. Record who handled the file, when, and what storage devices were used. Keep secure, log storage for originals. Coordinate with acoustic biologists for formant and harmonic analysis. Ask for spectrograms at multiple resolutions and raw FFT data. If controlled playback is necessary for scientific reasons, only do it under secure lab conditions with remote observation, sound insulation, and fail-safes. Never perform provocative playback in the field without sealed containment and a safety plan. Engage local indigenous knowledge holders as equal partners from the start. Their linguistic and place-and-name knowledge may be crucial to interpretation and to ethical handling. Obtain consent before publishing material tied to community knowledge or sacred sites. Safety first rules for everyone. Never assume this is harmless entertainment. The pattern on the tape suggests active boundary enforcement. Teasing or testing may provoke material damage or personal risk. If equipment has been disturbed, cameras repositioned, small tools missing, withdraw and report. Do not attempt confrontation. Report incidents to local land managers or park authorities with a secure description of the event and a request for an evidence handling protocol. Where appropriate, contact university labs or recognized acoustic researchers rather than posting publicly. Why these steps matter: the voice on the confidential file read like a set of instructions. Map human activity. Warn and create consequences when warnings are ignored. Preserving the chain of custody and treating data with restraint does two things at once. It protects people from needless escalation, and it protects the integrity of potential scientific evidence. Rushing to make the audio viral can destroy forensic traces, strip cultural context, and spark dangerous copycat behavior. If you have a recording, document, copy, and contact experts quietly. If you heard something in the woods, withdraw, record context, and report. If you're a researcher, proceed with rigor, chain of custody, and community partnership. The tape's lesson is blunt and urgent. Respect boundaries, preserve truth, and act with care. What you do in the first 15 minutes after an encounter will determine whether the sound becomes a spectacle or a signal that can be understood. This tape does more than complicate a legend. It changes the terms of the conversation. After 3 independent lines of inquiry, acoustic science, metadata verification, and cultural testimony, a consistent picture emerges, a non-human source, produced, organized, speech-like vocal patterns that referenced presence, boundaries, and specific human activities. Those patterns were not random. They behaved like address and instruction. They were tied, in the recording's metadata and in eyewitness reports, to a place where human operations and a non-human interest intersected. Put plainly, The sounds are purposeful. They announce, they name, and they forbid. Acoustic analysis shows formant behavior and harmonic content incompatible with ordinary human mimicry. Seismic correlation and file headers confirm the sequence occurred where and when the file claims. And Mary Talpine's reaction, the only cultural reading made openly available by consent, places the sounds inside a living frame of boundary speech, a tradition that treats certain places as watched, named, and defended. That combination matters because it forces a choice. This is no longer a curiosity to be teased apart on a forum or a viral clip to be shared for clicks. It is potential evidence of a communicative intelligence intersecting with human activity, and as such, it calls for careful, immediate action. What needs to happen next is simple, urgent, and constrained by ethics. First, protect the evidence. Do not amplify, edit, or publicly rebroadcast recordings without a secure plan. Audio that circulates freely invites imitation, provocation, and misinterpretation. It also destroys forensic traces that scientists and investigators need. Preserve originals, create verified copies, and log chain of custody details. This is not paranoia, it is standard practice when potentially dangerous behavior and priceless data meet. Second, respect cultural knowledge. Indigenous communities in the regions where these sounds arise hold contextual understanding that cannot be gleaned from spectrograms alone. Work with knowledge holders as partners, not sources. Obtain consent before interpreting or releasing material tied to place names or sacred landscapes. The tape itself implied place-specific meaning. Ignoring the people who hold that meaning is both ethically wrong and scientifically foolish. Third, change how we respond in the field. If you hear structured vocalizations, withdraw. Do not attempt to record a closer take. Do not play back sounds to see what happens. Evidence from the file's chain of custody and from controlled laboratory tests shows that playback can attract or escalate behavior. The correct response is retreat, documentation from a distance, and reporting to qualified authorities who can secure evidence properly. Fourth, demand transparency from agencies and laboratories. The files we've tracked here reached a small circle of professionals before leaking into rumor. Agencies that hold related data must be urged to publish redacted logs, release metadata where possible, and create protocols for independent review. Science advances when anomalies are studied openly and with rigor, not when they're buried or weaponized for sensationalism. Fifth, fund and support multidisciplinary study. This phenomenon sits at the intersection of acoustics, ethology, geology, and traditional knowledge. Funded, ethical research teams, including acoustic biologists, seismic analysts, linguists, and community liaisons, are needed to move from speculation to understanding. This means supporting labs that can preserve original sample rates and bit depths, run blind analyses, and correlate audio with seismic and motion camera records. There is also a practical, immediate checklist for anyone who finds themselves holding potential evidence. Stop, withdraw to safety. Do not play the recording in the field. Preserve the original device and create a forensically sound copy. Photograph the scene, log GPS coordinates and environmental conditions. Contact recognized researchers or land managers with secure channels, not social media. We are at a crossroads between spectacle and stewardship. The tape's voice insists on limits. Do not take, do not encroach, do not assume this is a game. Our response will determine whether these sounds become a smashed artifact of internet infamy or a replicable dataset that can teach us about intelligence. Placed in the consequences of human activity in fragile landscapes. If you have a file, an observation, or a memory of a night when something spoke, do not act alone. Reach out, preserve, and treat what you heard as both evidence and warning. Science can follow. Law and ethics must guide. The voice on the tape is clear enough to demand both caution and curiosity. We have listened. Now we must answer responsibly. The truth the tape offers is not only that something spoke, it is that something is listening back. We end Block 7 with a clear instruction. The voice on the tape demands respect, not clicks. Block 8 answers the obvious next question. What do we do now? As a society, as scientists, and as neighbors to a landscape that suddenly speaks back. First, a warning about timing. Once such material becomes public, responses fragment quickly. Curiosity turns to crowding, academics to opportunists, and agencies to spin. That window between discovery and disclosure is the moment to set rules. If we fail to act deliberately, the tape's evidence will be scattered, corrupted, or weaponized. Worse, the creatures, if the analysis is correct, may face harassment, habitat disruption, or forced confrontation. The choices made now will shape whether this becomes a tragedy or a breakthrough. Practical, immediate steps: the next 72 hours, issue a soft moratorium on non-essential field operations in the affected quadrangles. Leave equipment in place and secure sites to preserve context. Alert local indigenous governments and land stewards. Their knowledge and consent must lead any response. Treat their oral histories as scientific data, not folklore. Establish an emergency evidence protocol. Photograph devices in situ. Make one forensically sound image of the file and transfer custody via sealed storage. No public posting, no casual playback. Create a multi-party oversight cell. At minimum, an experienced acoustic biologist, a seismic analyst, a cultural liaison chosen by the local community, a legal advisor, and an independent scientist from a neutral university lab. This cell controls access to the material and approves any limited ethical testing. Medium-term actions, weeks to months: fund and deploy a controlled study team with clear mandates: preserve, measure, and report. Their work should prioritize blind analysis, independent replication, and cross-validation with seismic, motion camera, and ecological data. Build a secure, centralized repository for anomalous acoustic files with version control and immutable metadata storage. This reduces a chance of tampering and creates a chain of custody that courts and journals can accept. Develop field standards for playback policy. Under no circumstances should live playback be used as a public lure. Playback must occur only in controlled settings with safety protocols, consent from local communities, and under supervision of the oversight cell. Support ethno-linguistic study that respects indigenous protocols. If names and place syllables appear in vocalizations, honor the knowledge holders who can interpret those signals. They should be paid, credited, and central to decisions. Longer-term, structural change. Require agencies that oversee protected lands to publish redacted incident logs and metadata where legally possible. Transparency reduces conspiracy and speeds scientific progress. Create funding streams for multidisciplinary research: acoustics, ethology, conservation biology, linguistics, and social science. Prioritize ethical frameworks and community partnerships over sensational grant writing. Enact legal protections for both evidence and whistleblowers. Individuals who deliver potential evidence into public trust must be shielded from retaliation and given clear pathways to transfer custody securely. Risk management and ethical boundaries. Resist to temptations, militarization, and commodification. Military-grade response plans or manhunt framing could escalate conflict. Likewise, turning these recordings into entertainment viral stunts. Reality shows, gambling markets will destroy scientific value and put people and animals at risk. Recognize this may not be a single species problem, but a landscape problem, an intelligence exercising territorial constraints across human activity. Conservation, not conquest, must guide policy. What success looks like: a transparent, peer-reviewed body of work that either corroborates or falsifies the hypothesis of structured, non-human vocal communication. This requires preserved data, repeatable methods, and community-led knowledge sharing. Protocols that can be replicated globally in other regions where anomalous vocalizations are reported. A standard of care that turns rumor into replicable science. Protection for places and peoples affected, ensuring that discovery does not lead to dispossession. Finally, a human ask: if you hold a recording, a memory, or a set of coordinates, do not release them to the social maelstrom. Preserve, contact trusted researchers, and involve local stewards. The tape warns, and listening will force decisions. We can choose panic, profit, or precaution. The voice on the tape is neither a spectacle nor a secret to hoard. It is a demand for responsible action. Choose stewardship. Choose science. Choose respect,